Retirement plans can be tricky, and many people make key mistakes in the early stages. Chase Wilsey of Wilsey Asset Management here to break down the steps to avoid. Chase, good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, we're going to run down this list here. The first mistake here is misinterpreting financial calculators. I don't even know what that means. Explain that.
So if you look at a lot of financial websites now, you even look at a lot of 401k websites, they offer these financial calculators that say, well, if you do this, you're going to have all this money in retirement. And if you look at this, well, wow, you're going to have X amount of income in retirement. It sounds great and it's really fancy. But the problem is a lot of people don't understand the inputs that are going into the equation. A lot of times people are putting the inputs in themselves, and they might have done really well over, let's say, the last 2 years. And wow, I averaged 15% per year, so I'm going to do that for the next 40 years. That's just not a reality, and it's really going to overinflate what your retirement picture is going to look like.
Yeah, we see those things popping up on every single website almost. Oh, what do you need to do to get $1 million? Is $1 million enough for your retirement? Stuff like that gets people thinking. Does all of that account for, say, inflation? Because if you retire in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years, things are going to change.
You know, that's such an important point that you bring up, because some of them account for inflation. But the problem is, if you're the one putting in that inflation, you have to make sure you put in a reasonable amount of inflation. Over the last few years, we haven't seen much of it. This year, all of a sudden, we're seeing a big spike. And going forward, who knows what inflation is going to be? You need to be realistic with it. But then some financial calculators do not pull out that inflation number. So again, if you're looking 40 years down the road, you think, wow, I'm making $4,000 a month right now, let's say. That's great. That's all I need to retire. I can tell you $4,000 a month 40 years from now is not going to be the same as it is today.
Right. Okay. Next up, we're talking about over-relying on target date funds. Kind of brought that up when you're looking at, in 40 years, this and that. Explain why that is bad.
Yeah, so the target date funds, I mean, these are just really an oversimplified, I'm going to say, investment tool. What it does is it slides your allocation to, let's say, equities, international stocks, and bonds according to your retirement date. So as you get closer to retirement, the more you're going to hold in bonds. And right now, I just think bonds, they're not going to keep up with inflation. So I look at, let's say, the 2025 Fidelity Retirement Date Fund. You have close to 50% of your money in bonds and cash. I'm sorry, if you retire in 2025, you could easily live another 30 years. Half of your portfolio is going to be doing terribly against inflation. So I just worry about the oversimplification of this type of product. And I'd rather have people understand what they own, because all a target date fund is, it's a fund of funds. So what I mean by that is it's one fund, and it invests in all of these different funds. So at the end of the day, you really have no idea what you're invested in. And some of them, you could even be paying double fees, because the target date fund could charge a fund, and then the fund within inside that fund could still be charging a fee as well. So be very cognizant of that.
You know, if you're ever worried about people not knowing how to properly prepare for their retirement, just look at the statistics that show more and more people are working later and later into their lives. They're working into their 60s more than ever before, sometimes into their 70s, and that's the reason.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I think a lot of it, too, is we always say financial planning, it's really dynamic. We talked about, again, the financial calculators, and things are always changing. People might have this great plan in place, and then, oh, gosh, a thing like COVID hits, and you sell everything at the bottom. Financial planning isn't about looking out 20 years and saying, wow, that's going to be great. And then all of a sudden, year 10, maybe you change your plan and you do the wrong thing. Financial planning, as I said, dynamic. You have to make sure you make the right decisions at the right times.
And lastly, and I think this is a big one, in terms of key mistakes people make, thinking that Social Security is all you need. Whoa, Nelly, it's not for most people.
No, it's really not. Not even today can it be enough to cover enough for most people. I looked it up here. About the average retiree collecting Social Security gets about $1,500 a month, a little over $1,500 a month. It's a nice supplement, is what Social Security could be. And the other thing I want to point out is I do worry about Social Security's form, let's say 20, 30 years from now. Right now, the trust funds estimated to run out in about 2034. And that doesn't mean Social Security is going to go away, because it's a pay-go system. So there'll always be people paying into the program. The problem is, we know there's a lot of baby boomers that are on the cusp of retirement here. As they start collecting more, all of a sudden that trust fund is going to dwindle even quicker. And now we're going to be able to collect less benefits. So I think Social Security is going to be around in the future, but it's going to be at a minimized rate compared to what it is today.
So before we wrap it up, in terms of people trying to figure out what they're going to need for their retirement, everybody's different, we know that. So how can you find out how much you're actually going to need into retirement? Because you mentioned, oh, you can still going to live another 30 years. You don't know. You could live, you retire, and the next thing you know, you live to 100, and you're like, oh my God, that's 30, 40 years.
And that's a great point, because a lot of times people, they think, well, I'm going to project out the next 30 years. I'm sorry, it's just not a reality to do so. The big thing when it comes to the financial planning decisions is you have to just be realistic in each step of the way. So when you're young, save in your 401k. Make sure you're investing in good companies. When you're older, make sure you don't sell out at bad times. Make sure you don't put all your money into cash. It's not about trying to predict what's going to happen in 30 years, because even when it comes to like government projections on budgets, I hate when people try and project out that far. There's just not a reality of predicting items like COVID like we saw last year. So it really comes down to making the right decisions at the right time, and that's what you're going to have to do to have the best plan in place.
And if you're confused, if you don't quite understand how to do this, you got to talk to somebody. Be responsible and talk to somebody about it. That's why Chase is here, you know?
Exactly.
Chase, thank you so much. We appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Okay, still to come on the Fox 5 Morning News.